numbers? Because last I checked, fantasy baseball is a lot to do with numbers, being a numbers game. How about this line from yesterday? Against the Phillies, Zack Wheeler, who took the loss 6-6, 5 innings pitched, 8 hits, 6 earned runs. He did strike out 7, but he walked 2, gave up a home run, threw 104 pitches in 5 innings, and he has an ERA on the season now of 4.69. Jack, I did too. Jack says, I heard Callaway and Van Wagenen got into an argument and Van Wagenen threw a chair. Well, I think I saw something on Twitter this weekend. It had 2 people with chairs in their hands, and the little script was, this is how the Mets players warm up before games. And it had them like they were getting ready to throw a chair at each other. You know, everything in New York, in Flushing and Queens, has become more of a joke than it has about playing baseball. I don't know. And the Mets, if they think their players for this year, they're living in a hemisphere that I don't reside in, and they're certainly not going to be players. And I don't know if you trade off pieces, but certainly Zack Wheeler, I wonder how he would pitch for a contender. I wonder if he went to another environment, if Zack Wheeler would not be a great add. And you think about these contenders, there's so many of them who could use a pitcher, New York Yankees, Boston Red Sox. And would the Mets deal with crosstown rival New York Yankees on Zack Wheeler? Would the premium be higher just because it's the Yankees? Owen Holy says on opening day the Mets look like the 4th best team in the division. They may be 5th. Have you looked at Miami lately? I mean, I know the records, they're 6 games behind the Mets, but lately, would you rather be a Miami Marlin going forward or a New York Met? I'm a Marlin. I love their team. We're going to talk about them in just a moment. I got to get through these standings. But, hey, it's what we got. The Central and the National League, it's becoming a battle of attrition more than a battle of who's got the most talent. Who can survive and advance in the National League Central? The Cubs are at 47-43 after 90 games, only 4 games above 500. The Brewers, 47-44, only 3 games above 500. They're in second place. A half a game out. St. Louis, 2 games out, playing 500 baseball. The Pirates, 44-45, 2.5 games out, and 1 game under 500. For example, they're 2.5 games out in the National League Central. If they were in the American League East this morning, they'd be 13.5 games out. That just shows you the mediocrity of the Central. It also provides for an interesting second half. Going back to the chat room for a moment. Where is Cano? What is he doing? Good question. Let's see what I can tell you. He went 1 for 4 yesterday. He's hitting .240 on the year. Are you into that? I mean, let's take a look at some of Cano's recent games. I love doing this on the fly, don't you? Okay, so over his last 6 games, he's had 22 at-bats and 7 hits. So he's hitting over 300 his last 7. But during that time, no home runs and no RBIs. Hitting .240 on the year, 4 homers, and 18 RBIs. Are they looking to trade him? And here's the question. Who's going to want him? And I'm being serious. Who's going to want a Robinson Cano at this stage of his career? Is he tainted by the suspension from last year? And that's where you are. Central National League, the Reds, who've lost 2 in a row, lost to Cleveland yesterday 11-1. 41-46, 5 games under 500, but only 4.5 games out of first place in the National League Central. Looking at how we start the second half, the Cubs are home to the Pirates. The Brewers are home to the Giants. The Cardinals are home to the Diamondbacks. And the Reds are in Colorado in the Mile High City playing the Rockies. National League West, the Dodgers. The Dodgers with 60 wins before the All-Star break. That's almost unheard of. Playing .652 baseball, the best record in the major leagues. But they've lost 3 in a row to the Padres. But their lead in the National League is gargantuan. I'm using these nice adjectives this morning. I hope you're into that, okay? George just said it came across my desk that the Mets could have some interest in Joe Girardi. I guess the question would be, would Joe Girardi have interest in the Mets, George? What do you think? I mean, Girardi seems to be enjoying the broadcast booth, the analyst table. I'm just thinking, but of course everybody has a price, right? It's like John Gruden when he went back to coach the Raiders and he's getting $10 million a year. I mean, I guess if they would blow Girardi away, but I agree with you, Andrea. Girardi has zero interest. He's a great manager. He's one of the old school managers. He's not really one of these newfangled. I'm looking at the cybermetrics. Blah blah blah. He's a player's manager. He's a tough-nailed guy. Bobby Bonilla still has a price. Yeah, we had Bobby Bonilla Day, July 1st. We'll have that every year going forward until he's paid. And I looked at it, I think it's 2035, excuse me. I think I'm going to be 70 years old when Bobby Bonilla is no longer under contract to earn $1 million a year or more with the New York Mets. I've been on the Mets enough. But the Dodgers, they're 13.5 up on the Diamondbacks even after losing 3 in a row and even after the Diamondbacks winning 3 in a row. They swept Colorado over the weekend. Colorado is now in 4th place in the division. The Padres are at 45-45, 14 out. And Colorado 44-45, 14.5 out. The Giants are in last place. Let's look at the wild card standings in the National League, where the Nationals now, that's right, the Washington Nationals, going 8 of their last 10, are in first place in that wild card by a half a game over the Phillies. And the Phillies are in the second wild card, leading the Brewers by a half a game. The Diamondbacks are 1.5 out of the second wild card. The Padres 2 games out. The Cardinals 2 games out of the second wild card. The Rockies and Pirates both 2.5 games out of the second wild card. And the Cincinnati Reds 4.5 games out of the second wild card. Now the Giants are 5.5, and I think Lenny was talking about on his show, are the Giants thinking that they are still players in the playoffs? No. But it's amazing what teams think with this new system. And when you look at the fact, and the team says, we've won our last 2 games. We just beat the Cardinals 1-0. Samardzija pitched a great game. He's starting to pitch. We're starting to hit. We got these young players. But the Giants aren't going anywhere this year. And while I'm talking about the Giants, let's look at some of their fantasy players. Okay? Buster Posey. Going into the second half, he's hitting .253 with 3 home runs and 22 RBIs. When you think of Buster Posey in fantasy, are those the numbers that you typically think of? But that's what it's become. Okay? I heard Andrea say a few weeks ago, if Kevin Pillar is available in your league, go get him. Pillar is hitting .247, 12 homers, 48 RBIs. But over the last week, and I like to look at recency, okay? 23 at-bats, 7 hits. So he's hitting over 300 the last week. He has a homer. He scored 5 runs. And for the Giants, folks, that's a lot. And he's driven in 5. Look for Pilar. If he can put up these numbers, the Giants can at least be competitive. Longoria. Don't hear his name much in fantasy anymore, do you? He was added in a league I'm in this weekend. And why? Because over his last 20 at-bats, he has 9 hits, 450. And, here you go, he's kind of sneaky here, 5 home runs over the last week. Don't be surprised if Evan Longoria is National League Player of the Week. 5 homers, 10 RBIs. He scored 8 runs, batted .450. That's over the last week. Evan Longoria. He may be available. I love what George said. I'd rather own Eva Longoria. I tell you what, I'd rather own her too. Not to play baseball, but at any rate, I could just look at her, right? But I'm just saying, these are guys who are putting up numbers. And I'm not dropping a major player for any of these people. And I don't expect Longoria to continue, but don't you ride the hot hand if you have a hole you need filled? I also talked about Brandon Belt. They moved him to the leadoff spot. Over the last week, 8 hits. No home runs, but 8 hits in a week. And in fantasy, you can do a lot worse. Alex Dickerson, last 4 games, 5 hits. He's at .303 on the year with 4 homers. I'm just throwing these names out because these are players that you might can get in a fantasy league because they're Giants. Austin Slater, didn't talk about him yet. He's had, in the last week, he's had 6 hits with 2 homers. Now, I think Giant players are going to cool off, but there's certainly players that you want to consider as you're going forward. Let's take a look at the Dodgers. Why not? Bellinger, let's start at the top and work down. .336 average, 30 homers. He scored 70 runs. He's got 71 RBIs, 8 stolen bases. He is 1 for his last 10. So, chat room. Does Bellinger cool off significantly? Maintain current level, .336, going into the second half. Do the Dodgers start giving their players rest, being that they're 13 and a half games up and there's 70 games left to the regular season? And if Muncy and Bellinger and so on get rest, how does that affect you in fantasy? And I know this sounds crazy, but do you take a player like a Muncy and try to trade him for someone like a Moustakas? Maybe it's not crazy. Muncy, .269 at the break, 22 homers, 61 RBIs. Second base, first base, third base eligible. And how about that for a trade? If I had Muncy, I think I'd try to get Moustakas. Why? Because the Brewers are going to play every day, and he's going to play every day down the stretch. I mean, that's what I think we look at. And I used to manage totally different in fantasy because I'd have these great players, but then the last 2 weeks, if they were on great teams with 10-game leads, they started getting back off every other day. And the last 2 weeks, last 4 weeks of the season, playoff time, you need players who play every day. Cubs, Brewers, Cardinals, Nationals, Phillies, Diamondbacks, Padres. These are guys who will play every day. I think it's to be interesting for the Dodgers. A.J. Pollock, he's due back right after the All-Star break, completing his rehab assignments. The same applies to their shortstop, Corey Seager, due back in Boston. The Dodgers adding Seager and the Dodgers adding Pollock, it means a couple of things. I think Seager and Pollock will be eased back in. I think over time they'll play more regularly. That means if those two guys are playing regularly, someone is not. Chris Taylor, wake up. Verdugo, wake up. If you're an owner, can you trade now? because they're not going to get the playing opportunity once these guys are back. And if, of course, the question is, do they remain healthy? I got a cough coming. Excuse me.